Dead America. Tales from the Outer Banks. The Pier. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0. 8:55 p.m. The Surfside Bar stood like a weathered sentinel on the Outer Banks shoreline, its wooden beams and salt-worn planks bearing the scars of 70 years of coastal living. Connected to one of the busiest fishing piers on the island, it had survived countless hurricanes, each one leaving its mark on the structure but never managing to topple it. The bar faced the Atlantic directly, embracing both the breathtaking sunrises and the fierce storms that occasionally rolled in from the horizon. As night descended, strings of paper lanterns illuminated the outdoor seating area, casting a warm glow over the weathered tables and wooden booths. Most of the seating was protected by a large patio roof, while a few adventurous tables sat fully exposed to the elements, offering unobstructed views of the star-filled sky. The scent of fried seafood and cold beer hung in the air, mingling with the salt spray that periodically drifted in on the cool evening breeze. Parker and Tina stood by the server's computer where they entered orders, their eyes fixed on the digital clock as the ocean breeze carried a noticeable chill through the bar. The approaching off-season was making itself known, whispering promises of quiet months ahead. Though the summer crowds had thinned considerably, a handful of patrons still lingered, savoring their final vacation meals before returning to their mainland lives. "Come on, 9 o'clock, Tina murmured, her slender fingers tapping impatiently against the computer screen's frame. Parker glanced over at her, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Are you that anxious to be unemployed?" "It's not unemployment, just a 5-month vacation where I can stay up late working on my art, then sleep in until noon and take a walk on the beach before getting back to it," Tina replied, a dreamy quality entering her voice as she imagined the creative freedom awaiting her. "Well, when you put it that way, it does sound pretty good," Parker admitted, leaning against the counter with a wistful expression. His own plans for the off-season involved saving every possible dollar for college, though the idea of lazy beach mornings held undeniable appeal. Jennifer, the bartender and owner, knocked firmly on the bar top a few feet away, the sharp sound cutting through their reverie and recapturing their attention. Her sun-bronzed skin and windswept blonde hair testified to a lifetime spent near the ocean. Though approaching her late 30s, she retained the casual vigor of someone who'd chosen to build a life around the rhythms of the sea rather than urban demands. "It's not the end of the season yet, and you still have tables," she reminded them, her tone firm but not unkind. Jennifer cracked half a smile, the lines around her eyes crinkling with understanding. The summer had been unusually busy, with more tourists flocking to the beach than in previous years. Her small crew had worked tirelessly through the heat and humidity, serving endless plates of seafood while maintaining smiles despite their exhaustion. She couldn't blame them for counting the minutes until their well-deserved break. "I'll go check on them now, Jennifer," Tina offered, straightening her posture and smoothing down her server's apron. "I'm sure they'd appreciate it," Jennifer replied with a knowing nod. "And if you want to nudge them towards the door a bit, we can get to the party a little faster," Parker added with a mischievous grin. Jennifer gave him a half-hearted scolding look, her green eyes narrowing slightly. Parker immediately put his hands up in an apologetic gesture, though the smile never left his face. Tina surveyed the restaurant, taking inventory of the remaining customers. The central bar held a young couple sharing a heaping plate of nachos and sipping from frosted beer glasses, their heads tilted toward each other in intimate conversation. A few seats down sat Lucas, a fixture as permanent as the bar stools themselves, nursing what was clearly not his first beer of the evening. His weather-beaten face and permanent tan marked him as a local who had lived through enough Outer Banks seasons to predict the weather better than any meteorologist. Scattered among 3 tables sat 8 people divided into separate groups. Most had already finished their meals, empty plates pushed to the sides as they lingered over drinks. One table, however, was looking around expectantly, clearly seeking service. Tina noticed their searching gazes and quickly made her way over, professional smile already in place. "Hey, was there something else I can get you?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough warmth to mask her weariness. The male diner, a sunburned tourist with shoulders beginning to peel, looked up hopefully. "Is the kitchen still open?" Tina checked her watch, which showed a few minutes before 9. She knew the kitchen staff wouldn't be happy about a last-minute order, but she nodded, mentally calculating the potential tip against Elliot's inevitable irritation. The forced smile never left her face. "If I hurry, I think they can get you something else." The female diner brightened immediately. "I would love an order of the deep-fried cookies." Tina's smile became more genuine at the simple request. The deep-fried cookies were one of the easiest items to prepare, requiring minimal effort from the kitchen. She began moving toward the kitchen before the woman even finished speaking. "I'll put it in right now." With hurried steps, Tina marched to the kitchen, knocking firmly on the food delivery window to get Elliot's attention. The metallic sound caused him to turn around, his expression darkening as he immediately understood the implication of her presence. His eyes darted to the clock on the wall, confirming his suspicion. "Are you really trying to place an order with 2 minutes until closing time?" he demanded, frustration evident in his voice and the tight set of his shoulders. "I know, Elliot, I'm sorry, but they look like they're loaded, and I really want my tip," Tina explained, injecting just the right amount of apologetic sweetness into her tone. Elliot let out a deep sigh, shaking his head. Behind the gruff exterior and perpetually stained apron was a cook who couldn't bring himself to refuse Tina's requests. The other waitstaff he would have told to screw off without hesitation, but Tina's earnest demeanor always managed to soften his resolve. "What do you need?" he conceded, already reaching for a clean portion container. "Just one order of deep-fried cookies." "I'll drop them right now," Elliot promised, his irritation visibly fading. "But if they leave you a big tip, you owe me a beer." Tina's face lit up with genuine gratitude. "You got it. Thank you." Elliot nodded and opened a container, dropping cookies into batter before unceremoniously tossing them into the bubbling deep fryer. The oil hissed and popped as the dough sank beneath the surface, beginning its transformation into the crispy, gooey dessert that customers raved about. Meanwhile, at the bar, Jennifer leaned casually against the counter, chatting with the young couple. Their relaxed postures and easy laughter suggested they were enjoying their vacation. "So this is your last night open?" the woman, Dawn, asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "For this season, at any rate," Jennifer confirmed, wiping down the already clean bar top. Hayden, Dawn's boyfriend, shoved a large nacho chip loaded with toppings into his mouth, speaking around it with youthful disregard for etiquette. "That's a shame because the food here is incredible." Jennifer smiled at the compliment, genuinely pleased despite having heard similar praise countless times over the years. "We do aim to please, but you should have gotten here earlier in your vacation because, if I'm being honest, the nachos are one of our weaker dishes. If this is one of your worst items, I can't imagine what the good stuff tastes like," Hayden replied, reaching for another chip with appreciation. Lucas perked up from his spot down the bar, his speech slightly slurred from a full afternoon of drinking. "Those tuna bites are to die for. I don't know how she does it, but they seem to get better with every order." He glanced down beside his beer, spotting a small paper tray that held one final tuna bite. His eyes lit up with childlike delight as he popped it into his mouth, speaking while chewing with unabashed pleasure. "Oh, that's heaven in a bite-sized form." Jennifer laughed as she walked over to him, reaching behind the counter to retrieve another beer. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she popped the cap off and placed the frosty bottle in front of him. "While they are good, I think they taste better because every time you order them, you've put back a few more of these tall boys," she teased, nodding at the empty bottles lined up before him. Lucas chuckled, lifting his fresh beer in a spontaneous toast toward the young couple. Caden and Dawn responded by raising their glasses, somewhat confused by the sudden attention. "To young love," Lucas proclaimed with dramatic flair. "To young love," they echoed uncertainly, exchanging quick glances with each other. "Enjoy it now, because it don't hit nearly as good once you get into your 40s, Lucas added, a hint of melancholy seeping through his jovial facade. Jennifer rested her elbows on the bar, leaning toward him with a skeptical expression. "How would you know, Lucas? When's the last time you fell in love?" Lucas's face transformed as he slipped into his well-practiced drunk charm, eyes twinkling with exaggerated affection. "I fall in love every time I look at your blue eyes." "My eyes are green, but I appreciate the sentiment," Jennifer replied dryly, though amusement tugged at the corners of her mouth. They shared a laugh, the easy rhythm of their exchange revealing years of friendship and playful banter. As their laughter subsided, the 17-year-old busboy Oscar approached the bar, standing at the end with an air of hesitation, clearly reluctant to interrupt their moment. Jennifer finally noticed him hovering uncertainly. "What is it, Oscar?" "Oh, fine, leave me for a younger man," Lucas quipped, feigning jealousy. Jennifer chuckled as she playfully swatted at Lucas's hand, before turning her full attention to the teenager. "I think I got everything done that you wanted me to. Can I take off?" Oscar asked, his voice carrying the tentative quality of someone still adjusting to workplace dynamics. "Sure, but you're not staying for the party?" Jennifer inquired. Both Jennifer and Oscar flinched as the sound of a firework being set off shattered the ambient noise of conversation and ocean waves. A bright projectile launched from one of the booths outside the canopy, rising high before exploding in a burst of color that momentarily turned the night sky into a canvas of red and green, casting vibrant hues onto the pier and surrounding water. "Jesus, Parker, are you crazy?" Jennifer called out, her voice sharp with surprise. Parker stood poised with another giant firework in his hand, freezing mid-motion as he made eye contact with his boss. His expression hovered between defiance and apology. "It's the end of the season. I wanted to send us out with a bang," he explained, holding up the firework like evidence in his defense. Jennifer rolled her eyes, shaking her head in resignation. "Just a handful of them. Tonight's about having some fun, and fun doesn't involve bailing you out of jail." Parker smirked, giving her a thumbs up before carefully lighting the fuse of another rocket. The sparks hissed and spat as the flame ate its way toward the explosive payload. Jennifer turned back to Oscar, who was shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly eager to leave. "So you don't want to stay for the party then, Oscar?" "I would, but I gotta get home. Both my parents have been sick and I need to bring them dinner," he explained, his young face creased with concern. Oscar suddenly reached into his pocket as if just remembering the food he'd ordered for his parents was waiting to be paid for. The takeout containers sat in the kitchen window, packed with enough food for 3 people. Seeing him fumble for money, Jennifer shook her head firmly. "Don't worry about that, it's on the house." Oscar's face registered surprise, followed by profound gratitude as he nodded politely and returned the money to his pocket. "I'll be up here tomorrow morning if you want to come by and get some more food," Jennifer offered, her voice softening. "You work too hard to have to cook for your parents." "Thank you, Jennifer. You guys have fun tonight," Oscar replied. Parker raised his beer in Oscar's direction. "Oh, we will, Oscar. Don't you worry about that." A wide grin spread across Parker's face as he lit another large firework, leaning back dramatically as it shot skyward, before detonating in a spectacular burst of color against the dark canvas of night. Oscar gathered the bags of food from the window, waving a quick goodbye to Elliot before making his way around the side of the building. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to walk shoulder to shoulder, running the entire length of the structure before emerging onto a large wooden platform. Several benches and the hostess stand occupied this deck, which overlooked a 15-foot drop to the beach below. During daylight hours, the elevated position provided a picturesque view of beachgoers and the vast ocean beyond, but after sunset, it offered only darkness punctuated by mysterious shadows. He walked toward the sloping ramp that led to the parking lot, where only a handful of cars remained. Movement caught his eye. A lone figure running hard in his direction, footsteps echoing loudly on the wooden planks of the ramp. As the stranger approached at full speed, Oscar called out, his voice carrying on the night air. "Sorry, buddy, but we're closed." His words seemingly fell on deaf ears as the man continued sprinting toward him without slowing. When the runner reached the midpoint of the ramp, passing under a pool of light cast by an overhead lamp, Oscar could finally see that something was horribly wrong. The man's shirt was stained with dark splotches of what could only be blood, and his face was contorted in an expression of mindless rage. Oscar dropped the food containers, spinning on his heel to race back toward the safety of the restaurant. In his panic, he tripped over his own feet, the momentary stumble allowing the creature to close the gap between them. The ghoul slammed into Oscar with surprising force, sending them both tumbling toward the wooden railing. The impact drove the air from Oscar's lungs, leaving him gasping as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. The creature snapped its teeth at Oscar's face, the clicking sound impossibly loud in his ears. He tried to call for help, but could only manage a strangled grunt as he used all his strength to keep the snapping jaws at bay. With a surge of desperate energy, Oscar managed to shove the zombie back just enough to create space for escape. Instead of running for the bar, he made a split-second decision, launching himself over the railing and dropping into the darkness below. He landed with a painful thud on the packed sand dune, the impact jarring every bone in his body. Above, the zombie raced to the railing, peering down into the darkness in search of its prey, but seeing nothing in the shadows. At that moment, another firework shot up from the bar, its ascending whistle cutting through the night before exploding in a brilliant burst of color that momentarily illuminated the entire beach. The creature let out an excited moan before turning and sprinting toward the source of the light and noise, drawn inexorably toward the unsuspecting revelers at the Surfside bar. Chapter 2. 3 people from one of the lingering tables rose from their seats, gathering their belongings with the unhurried movements of those savoring the final moments of vacation. Their faces glowed with the contentment of a satisfying meal as they made their way toward the bar, pausing briefly to wave at Jennifer. "It was wonderful as always. Can't wait to come back in the spring," one of the patrons called out, a middle-aged woman with sun-kissed shoulders and a canvas tote bag slung over her arm. Jennifer leaned against the polished wood of the bar top, offering them a warm smile. "We'll be here. Y'all have a safe trip home." The group nodded appreciatively and continued toward the exit walkway, their conversation fading into the ambient sounds of clinking glasses and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Behind them, another of Parker's fireworks rocketed skyward, leaving a trail of sparks in its wake. "Are they regulars?" Caden asked, watching the departing patrons with curiosity. Jennifer shook her head, wiping down the counter as she responded, "Never seen them before in my life." Dawn tilted her head, a playful skepticism in her expression. "Then, how did you know they were headed home?" "The benefits of living in a tourist town," Jennifer replied with a knowing smile. "If I say safe travels to 5 people, chances are it will apply to 4 of them." Caden leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bar. "So what do you do when the 5th one gives you a weird look because they're local?" Jennifer's eyes crinkled with amusement. "We both laugh and say, 'I must be number 5. Dawn and Jennifer broke into easy laughter, their voices harmonizing in the salt-laden air. The moment of levity was violently interrupted as piercing screams erupted from the walkway leading to the parking lot, cutting through the night like shattered glass. Jennifer's smile vanished instantly, her gaze darting toward Parker and Tina. The 2 servers had congregated at what they designated as the firework launching pad table, their vantage point offering a clear view of the walkway. Jennifer watched them intently, trying to gauge the situation from their reactions. Both Parker and Tina stood transfixed, their eyes widening in horror as they witnessed the zombie that had attacked Oscar, now pinning one of the departing patrons against the wall. The creature's jaws locked onto the victim's throat, tearing away flesh in a savage display that defied comprehension. "Jesus Christ!" Parker exclaimed, stumbling backward and nearly toppling over the table, his instincts propelling him away from the horrific scene. Beside him, Tina remained motionless, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" Jennifer demanded, her voice sharp with alarm. Before either server could respond, a fresh chorus of screams erupted from the walkway. The other 2 patrons who had just left the bar collapsed to the ground, buried beneath 3 more creatures that had appeared from the darkness. Their desperate cries for help quickly transformed into agonized wails as the ghouls tore into their flesh with primal ferocity, ripping it free from bone with sickening efficiency. One creature, seemingly driven by some inscrutable hunger, bypassed the fallen victims entirely. It charged forward with unnatural speed, heading directly toward Parker and Tina, who stood unprotected at the edge of the dining area, only 20 yards from the advancing threat. The zombie rushed straight for Tina, its vacant eyes locked on her with predatory focus. At the last possible second, Parker snapped out of his stupor, grabbing Tina by the arm and yanking her out of the creature's path. The zombie stumbled forward, grasping at empty air where she had stood just moments before. Rather than turning to pursue its initial target, the creature's attention shifted to the nearby tables where 5 people sat frozen in confusion and growing terror. With a guttural moan, it lunged toward the closest patron, a middle-aged man whose vacation tan drained of color as the creature descended upon him. "Get off my customer," Jennifer shouted, her protective instincts overriding any fear or confusion. She grabbed a beer bottle from the counter, hurling it with surprising accuracy at the zombie. The bottle struck the creature squarely between the shoulder blades, shattering on impact, but the attack might as well have been a gentle tap for all the effect it had. The zombie continued its assault, unabated, sinking its teeth into the screaming patron's shoulder. The victim's companions attempted to intervene, throwing desperate punches and trying to pull the creature away. Their efforts only exposed them to the same fate, as the zombie lashed out at anyone within reach. Jennifer's eyes darted frantically around the restaurant, quickly assessing the mounting danger as more creatures emerged from the walkway, having finished with their previous victims. Making a split-second decision, she called out to the remaining unaffected patrons, "Get behind the bar." She reached across the counter, grabbing Dawn's arm and pulling her toward the relative safety of the bar's interior. Caden needed no further encouragement, vaulting over the polished surface before turning to help his girlfriend navigate the same obstacle. Lucas, watching the chaos unfold with the strange detachment of the thoroughly inebriated, calmly downed the last of his beer. With surprising agility for a man in his condition, he hopped onto the bar and slid over in one fluid motion, ducking down as he hit the ground on the other side. Across the restaurant, Parker maintained his grip on Tina's arm, pulling her toward the kitchen door. His eyes remained fixed on the zombies that had finished their gruesome feast on the walkway and were now turning their attention toward the remaining living beings in the vicinity. "Run, run," Parker urged, his voice cracking with urgency. The two servers sprinted across the wooden deck, their footfalls creating a desperate rhythm as they raced for safety. They burst through the kitchen door, the hinges protesting with a metallic screech as they slammed it shut, just before several pursuing creatures reached the threshold. "What in the frickin' hell is going on out there?" Elliot yelled from the back of the kitchen, where he stood beside a sink full of soapy dishes, his hands dripping with water. Before either server could respond, the door began to rattle violently as multiple zombies threw themselves against it, their collective weight threatening to breach the barrier. Parker and Tina pressed their bodies against the door, struggling to keep it closed as the deadbolt remained unfastened. "Tell them the kitchen's closed," Elliot shouted, oblivious to the true nature of the crisis unfolding beyond the door. Parker and Tina strained against the increasing pressure, their feet sliding slightly on the greasy floor as they fought to maintain their position. "Elliot, help us," Tina cried, panic elevating her voice to a pitch that finally conveyed the gravity of the situation. Sensing the genuine distress in her tone, Elliot abandoned his dishwashing, rushing across the kitchen to join them at the door. He threw his weight against the straining wood, adding his strength to their defensive effort. The combined force stabilized the door just enough for Parker to reach down and slide the deadbolt into place. "Now what in the hell is going on out there?" Elliot demanded, his face flushed from exertion. Before either of the servers could formulate a response, movement at the kitchen service window caught their attention. One of the zombies had abandoned the assault on the door, moving instead to the narrow opening through which food orders were passed. A bloody hand reached through the gap, accompanied by a snarl that seemed to belong to no living creature. Elliot stood rooted to the spot, staring at the grotesque appendage with an expression that cycled through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. The window was far too small for the creature to squeeze through, but it provided more than enough space for Elliot to get a clear view of what they were facing. After several frozen moments, he snapped out of his trance, his expression hardening with determination. "Yeah, that's not good. We have to help Jennifer," Tina insisted, her thoughts turning to those they'd left outside. Elliot's head whipped around, his incredulous gaze landing on Parker. "Christ, you left her out there?" Parker's face flushed with defensiveness. "Give me a break, they were running right for us, so I just reacted." Elliot responded with a derisive scoff, walking purposefully toward the service window, where the zombie continued its futile attempts to reach them. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron frying pan with a long handle from a nearby hook, approaching the window with caution. "Get out of the way, you ugly bastard," he muttered, shoving the improvised weapon through the opening and connecting solidly with the creature's face. The impact forced the zombie to step back momentarily, but it quickly resumed its position at the window. Elliot struck again with greater force, landing a solid blow to the creature's nose. The zombie's head snapped back from the impact, and its vacant eyes suddenly shifted, focusing on something beyond Elliot's line of sight. Whatever caught its attention must have been compelling, as the creature immediately abandoned the window, bolting toward this new potential target. With the obstruction cleared, Elliot cautiously peered through the opening, scanning the restaurant beyond. The bar appeared deserted, with no sign of Jennifer or the others who had taken refuge there. The rest of the dining area had transformed into a scene of carnage, with multiple zombies hunched over the fallen forms of unlucky patrons, engaged in a feeding frenzy that turned Elliot's stomach. He quickly backed away from the window, moving out of sight and turning to face the two servers. Parker and Tina stood side by side, their expressions stunned as the reality of their situation continued to sink in. "So, what do we do now?" Tina asked, her voice small and uncertain in the relative quiet of the kitchen. Parker cleared his throat before responding. "I have no idea." Chapter 3. The creatures continued to roam the restaurant, gravitating toward the fallen patrons who had been unable to escape their initial assault. Some zombies remained hunched over their victims, tearing at flesh with grotesque enthusiasm, while others wandered aimlessly, their vacant eyes scanning the surroundings for fresh prey. In the center of the circular bar, Jennifer, Lucas, Caden, and Dawn huddled close to the floor, their backs pressed against the wooden paneling. The structure offered minimal protection, just enough to keep them out of the immediate sight line of the wandering ghouls. Jennifer glanced toward the young couple, her eyes silently asking what they should do. Dawn and Caden could only return terrified looks, their faces drained of color as they struggled to process the horror unfolding around them. Both were clearly in shock, their vacation paradise having transformed into a waking nightmare in the span of minutes. Turning to Lucas, Jennifer found him calmly twisting the cap off a bottle of beer he'd somehow managed to grab during their hasty retreat. He took a long, unhurried drink, seemingly detached from the chaos surrounding them. Jennifer stared at him incredulously, unable to comprehend his nonchalance in the face of mortal danger. In response to her disbelieving gaze, Lucas merely shrugged. Carefully, Jennifer raised her head just slightly, keeping below the rim of the bar top. She didn't dare risk being spotted by any of the creatures that shambled through the dining area. Through the gap between liquor bottles, she could see the kitchen service window across the room. Elliot was visible inside, peering out at a zombie that lingered nearby, seemingly transfixed by something just out of Jennifer's line of sight. She attempted to wave, hoping to catch Elliot's attention, but his focus remained elsewhere. With a silent sigh, she retreated fully behind cover, her mind racing through limited options. After a moment of contemplation, she began to crawl across the sticky floor to the opposite side of the circular bar. Reaching up to a shelf mounted beneath the counter, she grabbed her cell phone before scuttling back to her original position. The device felt like a lifeline in her hands as she navigated to the settings menu, making sure the phone was set to silent mode. One errant notification sound could give away their position. With steady fingers, she opened her message thread with Elliot and began typing, "Help us, we're behind the bar." She hit send, hoping the message would reach him without alerting the creatures to their presence. Inside the kitchen, Elliot was still processing the surreal horror of their situation when a distinctive electronic chime pierced the tense silence. His head snapped around toward the sound, eyes landing on his belongings piled in the far corner of the room. "What the hell was that?" Parker demanded, his voice tight with alarm. "My phone," Elliot replied, already moving across the kitchen. He reached his personal items in 3 long strides, fumbling through his backpack until his fingers closed around the device. The screen illuminated with a new message notification. His eyes widened as he read Jennifer's desperate plea. "Holy shit, it's Jennifer," he announced, turning toward the others. Tina stepped closer, worry etched across her face. "Is she okay?" "No, she's behind the bar," Elliot responded grimly, already moving back toward the service window. He pressed his face close to the opening, scanning the restaurant for any sign of his boss and friend. The scene before him was chaotic. Several zombies wandered between tables, while others remained hunched over their victims. The bar itself appeared empty from his vantage point. "Do you see her?" Tina asked, hovering anxiously behind him. Elliot shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. There's too many of those things in the way." Looking down at his phone, he quickly typed a response. "I can't see you. Where are you?" The 3 kitchen refugees stared at the screen, waiting for Jennifer's reply. Each second stretched like an eternity, the only sounds being their own shallow breathing and the distant moans from beyond the door. Finally, the phone illuminated with her response. "We're in the middle, staying out of sight." Elliot contemplated their options, which seemed increasingly limited. After a moment's hesitation, he typed, "What do you want me to do?" Jennifer's response came almost immediately, the urgency palpable even through text. "Create a diversion so we can get to the kitchen." "Yeah, I was afraid that was what you were going to say," Elliot muttered, running a hand through his hair. Parker moved closer, peering over Elliot's shoulder at the message. "How are we supposed to do that?" Tina's face brightened suddenly with inspiration. "We can go out the emergency exit in the back, make some noise, and hope that draws them away." Before she could elaborate, Elliot was already shaking his head emphatically, his expression hardening. "Hell no. If we're getting out of here in one piece, it's going to be through that door and to the parking lot. What happens if we open it up and let a bunch of crazies know we're here?" Tina opened her mouth to counter his objection, but Parker spoke first, his voice carrying a determination that surprised even himself. "If we can't go out that door, it means we have to go out the bar's side one, so you better be ready to fight." Elliot's face tightened as he weighed their limited options. Moving back to the window, he surveyed the scene again with careful attention. Most of the zombies had congregated on the far side of the restaurant, their attention captured by the recently deceased patrons who were beginning to stir with unnatural movement. The transformation was happening before their eyes. The victims of the initial attack were now becoming creatures themselves. After a long moment, Elliot let out a string of muttered curses, his decision made. He typed quickly, "The door is opening in 15 seconds. Get ready to move." 15 seconds? What the hell are we doing? Parker demanded, his earlier confidence wavering in the face of imminent action. Elliot's expression was grim as he pocketed his phone, something incredibly stupid. Without further explanation, he grabbed Tina by the shoulders, positioning her directly in front of the service window where the zombie outside could clearly see her. The creature immediately focused on this new potential prey, pressing closer to the opening with renewed interest. Elliot then pushed past Parker, snatching a heavy cast-iron frying pan from the rack before moving purposefully toward the door. In his head, he maintained a steady countdown from 15, each passing second bringing them closer to the moment of truth. Parker followed his lead, grabbing a similar improvised weapon and falling into step behind the cook, despite not fully understanding the plan. When the mental countdown reached 0, Elliot quietly slid the deadbolt open. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the door ajar and stepped out into the restaurant, quickly checking both directions for immediate threats. As he'd hoped, the zombie near the kitchen window remained fixated on Tina, its back turned to the door. Across the room, Jennifer spotted the opening door and immediately recognized their chance. She emerged from beneath the swinging counter section of the bar, moving in a half-crouch toward the kitchen. Elliot caught her eye, gesturing urgently for her to hurry. Jennifer increased her pace, walking as quickly as caution would allow, her footsteps nearly silent on the wooden deck. Lucas followed close behind, miraculously maintaining his grip on his beer bottle even in their desperate escape. Dawn was next to emerge, rising shakily to her feet. As she took her first step toward safety, the zombie by the kitchen window glanced in her direction. Its dead eyes locked onto her, and in an instant, it abandoned its previous focus on Tina. The creature lunged forward with surprising speed, closing the distance to Dawn in seconds. Elliot reacted instinctively, darting across the space between them. He swung the frying pan with all his strength, the heavy iron connecting solidly with the zombie's face. The impact produced a sickening crunch and a tremendous clatter that echoed throughout the restaurant. Every creature in the vicinity snapped to attention, their vacant eyes fixing on the source of the noise, before they began moving en masse toward the disturbance. "Get your ass moving!" Elliot shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Dawn and Caden scrambled toward the kitchen door, panic giving their movements a frantic energy. The horde of zombies converged on their position with terrifying speed, drawn by the commotion and the sight of living prey. Elliot retreated into the kitchen, the others piling in ahead of him. He slammed the door shut just as the first wave of creatures reached it, the wood shuddering under the impact of multiple bodies. Several of the kitchen refugees threw their weight against the door, holding it closed long enough for Elliot to secure the deadbolt. The creatures continued to pound against the barrier, but after a few tense moments, it became clear that the door would hold. Gradually, the assault subsided as the zombies lost interest in the now inaccessible prey. "Thanks, Elliot. I owe you one," Jennifer said, her voice unsteady as the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a trembling exhaustion. Elliot offered a thin smile. "Just remember that when it's time to hand out raises." "I hate to be that guy, but now what?" Parker asked, voicing the question that weighed on everyone's mind. Tina walked purposefully to the back of the kitchen, retrieving her cell phone from her bag. With determined movement, she dialed 911, holding the phone to her ear as the others watched in silent hope. After 5 rings, the call abruptly disconnected without any response from an operator. "I got disconnected," she announced, confusion and fear mingling in her expression. The others quickly pulled out their own phones, each attempting to reach emergency services with the same result: endless ringing followed by disconnection. No dispatcher, no recorded message, nothing but silence on the other end of the line. "Anybody got anything?" Caton asked, looking around at the group with growing desperation. Dawn shook her head, lowering her phone. "Nothing, just ringing and disconnection." "It's amazing how quickly everything falls apart," Elliot observed, his voice quiet but carrying easily in the tense silence of the kitchen. Lucas took a long swig from his beer, his weathered face creased with a cynicism that seemed almost prophetic in the current circumstances. "Man, the whole world is just a house of cards. Why is anybody surprised when it comes crashing down at the slightest bump of the table?" The group turned toward him collectively, some with irritation at his philosophical detachment, others with grudging acknowledgement of the truth in his words. Lucas appeared unbothered by their attention, calmly finishing his beer before setting the empty bottle on the stainless steel counter with a soft clink. "Is there anybody else you can call?" Caden pressed, unwilling to accept their isolation. "Surely somebody knows somebody down here." Elliot's gaze shifted to Jennifer, his expression serious and pointed. She met his look, immediately understanding the unspoken suggestion, her face hardening in response. "No, hell no," she said firmly, shaking her head. "Jennifer, we don't have a choice," Elliot countered, his tone gentle but insistent. "I'm not calling him," Jennifer maintained, crossing her arms defensively. Dawn looked between them, confusion evident on her face. "Calling who?" "Officer Bowman," Elliot explained, his eyes never leaving Jennifer's face. "Why don't you want to call a police officer?" Caden asked incredulously. "Because this seems like the perfect time to call him up." Elliot's lips quirked in a humorless smile. "Because it's her ex-boyfriend." "Here's hoping it was a mutual breakup," Dawn commented, attempting to lighten the increasingly tense atmosphere. Jennifer stood in silent conflict, weighing her personal discomfort against their collective need for help. After a long moment, she released a defeated sigh, her shoulders slumping slightly as she accepted the inevitable. "Fine," she conceded. "But there goes your raise, Elliot." With reluctant movements, Jennifer retrieved her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger hovered over Officer Bowman's name for several seconds before she finally pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before connecting, the sound of someone picking up offering a small spark of hope. "This really isn't a good time, Jennifer," a deep male voice answered. Jennifer hesitated, surprised at the immediate recognition and the sounds of commotion audible in the background. Muffled thumps and distant shouting suggested that Officer Bowman was dealing with his own crisis. "I know, but I need your help," she finally replied, pushing past her discomfort. "We need your help." "Call the main line and they'll send somebody else out," he responded dismissively. "We tried, and there's nobody home at the main line," Jennifer insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "We're trapped and we need help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the significance of no one answering at dispatch clearly registering with Bowman. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its earlier brusqueness. "I don't know what I'm going to be able to do," he admitted, the sounds of struggle continuing in the background. "Just please, do a drive-by," Jennifer pleaded. "Let us know if the parking lot is clear so we can make a run for our cars." After a moment of consideration, Bowman's voice returned, curt but committed. Be ready to move in 5 minutes. Chapter 4. Jennifer positioned herself by the back door of the kitchen, her eye pressed against the small metal viewing slot that allowed a limited perspective of the outdoor area. From her vantage point, she could only see the wooden delivery platform that extended from the kitchen's exit, a raised loading area built directly onto the Pier's structure. The parking lot itself remained frustratingly out of view, hidden behind the angle of the building. The kitchen had fallen into an uneasy silence, the earlier panic giving way to a tense vigilance as they awaited Officer Bowman's arrival. The only sounds were the distant moans from the dining area and the occasional metallic clang as someone shifted position against the stainless steel counters. "Anything?" Caden asked, his voice tight with anticipation as he hovered behind Jennifer. She shook her head without turning away from the viewing slot. "Not yet, but we need to be ready to move when he gets here." Caden shifted his weight nervously, his earlier bravado diminishing with each passing minute. "Are you sure he's coming? I mean, if I had a chance to leave my ex high and dry, I would jump at the opportunity." Jennifer turned from the door, fixing Caden with a sharp look that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Bowman's not like that. We just wanted different things. It's not like I was out there banging other dudes behind his back or anything." The edge in her voice was unmistakable, a clear warning not to push the subject further. Caden raised his hands in a placating gesture before retreating back to Dawn, who stood trembling against the far wall. He took her hands in his, rubbing them gently between his palms in an attempt to comfort her. "Don't worry, we're going to be just fine," he assured her, his voice softening as he spoke to his girlfriend. Dawn attempted a smile, but it faltered, unable to mask the fear in her eyes. "I know. I'm just not looking forward to making a run for the car," Caden finished for her. "Me either. But just imagine, you're running to the car with your brother, wanting to get there first so you can have shotgun." From across the kitchen, Elliot snorted derisively. "A damn shotgun would be awesome right about now." Caden shot him a glare, irritated by the interruption to his attempt at reassurance. Elliot merely shook his head before walking away, giving the young couple the space they clearly needed. Jennifer, who had returned her attention to the viewing slot, glanced over her shoulder at the pair. "You two are riding with me, right?" "Yeah, if that's okay," Caden confirmed, looking grateful for the offer. "It is," Jennifer replied firmly. "Just don't lag behind because I don't want to stick around here any longer than we need to." Dawn nodded earnestly. "We'll be right behind you." Jennifer surveyed the rest of their makeshift refuge, taking inventory of the group's condition. Parker and Tina stood side by side near the industrial sink, their bodies leaning into one another for support, both physical and emotional. Lucas paced restlessly back and forth along the length of the prep counter, his hands opening and closing as if missing the familiar weight of a beer bottle. Elliot had hopped up onto one of the stainless steel prep stations, his legs swinging nervously as he waited for action. "Does everybody know where they're going?" Jennifer asked, her natural leadership asserting itself even in crisis. Parker looked up, his arm around Tina's shoulders. "Tina's going to ride with me." "What about you, Lucas?" Jennifer turned to the older man, who had paused his pacing at her question. Lucas offered a sardonic half smile, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I haven't owned a car in a decade, so if I could hitch a ride, that would be swell." "I got you, man," Elliot volunteered immediately. "Just don't go puking in my car." Lucas chuckled, some of his usual swagger returning. "Don't worry, I haven't had nearly enough to drink to start throwing up." "Let's keep it that way," Elliot replied with a smirk, the brief exchange lightening the oppressive atmosphere for a moment. The momentary levity was interrupted by the shrill ring of Jennifer's phone. She quickly checked the screen, her expression shifting to one of focused intensity when she saw Officer Bowman's name. Pressing the answer button, she immediately activated the speakerphone function so everyone could hear. "Hey Bowman, you're on speaker, you hear?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her posture. "I'm half a mile away," Bowman replied, his deep voice crackling slightly through the phone's speaker. In the background, they could hear the distinctive sound of a police cruiser's engine and the occasional burst from the radio. Parker stepped closer to the phone, unable to contain his questions. "Do you have any idea what is going on?" "No, kid. I don't, Bowman answered bluntly. But whatever it is, it's bad. Real bad. Jennifer's grip on the phone tightened, her knuckles whitening. Is there any place we can go that's safe? There was a notable pause before Bowman responded, the silence laden with implications that sent a collective chill through the group. Jen, I honestly don't know, he finally admitted. I've been on 4 calls already and seen worse shit than I saw when I was over in the sandbox. Jesus, Jennifer whispered, her composed facade cracking slightly at the gravity in Bowman's tone. Parker mouthed the word sandbox with confusion, clearly unfamiliar with the term. Tina leaned toward him, whispering in his ear, he was in the military. Parker nodded in understanding as Bowman continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had already witnessed too much in one night. Are you sure you want to leave there? He asked, a note of genuine concern breaking through his professional demeanor. Yeah, we are, Bowman, Jennifer confirmed. The front door is solid enough, but the back door has some damage to it. If enough of those people try to get in, I think they will. Elliot jumped down from his perch, moving closer to the phone. Come on, Bowman, there's got to be someplace safe we can go. If you think your house is built well enough, you can board it up like a hurricane is coming, Bowman offered. Then, after a brief pause, he added, but if it were me, I'd be getting offshore any way I could. The group exchanged meaningful glances as they processed the implication of Bowman's advice. None of them owned a boat, and Bowman knew that Jennifer didn't have one, which explained his careful phrasing. He was suggesting that finding a vessel and getting away from land might be their best hope for survival, without explicitly saying so. I hear you, Bowman, Jennifer acknowledged, the subtle message received. We're ready to go when you get here. Pulling up now, get ready to move, Bowman announced, his voice shifting to a more clipped, professional tone. Understood, we'll be ready, Jennifer confirmed, motioning for everyone to gather closer to the door. The group huddled near the exit, muscles tense and poised for action as they listened to Bowman's narration through the speakerphone. The sound of his cruiser's engine idling came through clearly, along with the crunch of gravel under tires. Pulling into the lot, he reported, I don't really see much of anything. Jennifer's hand hovered over the door handle, ready to throw it open at a moment's notice. So, the path to our cars is clear? I think it is, but you have to move, Bowman began, his voice trailing off abruptly. The sudden silence lasted only a second before it was shattered by Bowman's alarmed shout. Jesus Christ! The group recoiled collectively at the explosion of fear in his voice, so at odds with the controlled demeanor he'd maintained until now. Through the speaker came the sound of frantic movement, followed by heavy thuds against what must have been the cruiser's exterior. Bowman's muttered curses painted a vivid picture of a situation rapidly deteriorating. Bowman, what is it? Bowman, Jennifer called out, pressing the phone closer to her ear as if that might somehow help. After several agonizing seconds of rustling and thumping sounds, Bowman's voice returned, deliberately calm despite the ongoing commotion in the background. Sorry, I'm fine. What's that noise? Jennifer demanded, though the rhythmic pounding coming through the speaker told its own story. Bowman released a deep sigh, allowing the unmistakable sound of zombie hands smacking against his vehicle to fill the silence for a moment before responding. A couple of those crazy people came out of nowhere, caught me off guard. Now there's half a dozen of them banging on my car. Damn it, Jennifer exclaimed, her composure finally cracking under the weight of their mounting setbacks. What about our cars? Can we still get to them? The line went quiet again, but they could hear Bowman shifting inside his vehicle, presumably trying to get a better view of the parking area. The suspense was palpable as they waited for his assessment, each second stretching interminably. I don't think so, he finally reported, his tone grim. It's dark, but I think I can see something moving. What the hell do we do now? Caden asked, the last vestiges of his confidence evaporating as their escape route disappeared. I have an idea, but it's risky, Bowman offered, after a brief hesitation. Jennifer straightened her posture, a determined set to her jaw. It is what it is. Now what's the plan? I can hit my siren and back out of the lot, try and lead them away from you, Bowman explained. Elliot frowned. Won't that just draw more of them towards us? It very well might, Bowman acknowledged candidly, "but you should have a brief window to get to your cars." "Is there nothing else you can do?" Dawn asked, her voice small but desperate. "Don't you have a gun?" "I do have a gun," Bowman confirmed, "but I don't have enough bullets to take them all on." Jennifer looked around the kitchen, making eye contact with each person in turn. One by one, they each gave a slight nod, recognizing that they needed to seize this opportunity, flawed as it might be. There was no guarantee that another chance would present itself, and remaining in the kitchen indefinitely wasn't a viable option. With their silent consensus established, Jennifer turned back to the phone. "Okay, Bowman, we're going to do it your way," she decided. "Let us know when you're ready." Chapter 5. The group stood anxiously by the back door of the kitchen, bodies tense with anticipation as they awaited Officer Bowman's signal. The earlier frenetic energy had given way to a weighted silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Some stared at the floor, others at the ceiling, anywhere but at each other, as if eye contact might somehow break the fragile control they were maintaining over their fear. Jennifer's gaze remained fixed on the door, her mind cycling through contingency plans. The others had fallen into an almost trance-like state, a psychological defense mechanism allowing them to disassociate from the moment, trying desperately not to dwell on the perilous sprint they were about to attempt. "Remember, everybody," Jennifer said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Move fast, get to your cars, and follow me to the docks." Finally, Bowman's voice crackled through the phone speaker, his tone calm and measured, the voice of a professional who had trained for crisis situations, even if nothing could have prepared him for this particular nightmare. "Hitting the sirens now. You wait until I tell you to move, and good luck." "Thanks, Bowman," Jennifer replied, the simple words carrying the weight of their complicated history. The officer didn't acknowledge her gratitude, his focus already shifting to the task at hand. Seconds later, the piercing wail of police sirens erupted from the parking lot, the sound penetrating the kitchen walls with near-deafening intensity. The electronic scream clawed at their already frayed nerves, but also carried a strange promise of hope, a beacon to draw away the threat that kept them caged. Jennifer slid open the small viewing slot in the door, pressing her eye against the opening. From her limited vantage point, she could see a portion of the main pier walkway that led down to the parking lot. Almost immediately, a stampede of creatures appeared in her field of vision, their jerky, uncoordinated movements belying the alarming speed with which they rushed toward the source of the noise. "It's working," she announced, a note of guarded optimism in her voice. Elliot glanced back toward the service window that connected to the bar area, his expression darkening as he observed several ghouls still reaching through the opening with grasping, blood-smeared hands. "Not for all of them," he observed grimly. But Jennifer ignored her cook's pessimism, continuing to monitor the situation outside. A couple more creatures ran past her field of view, followed by an encouraging emptiness. The plan seemed to be working. The majority of the zombies were being drawn away by Bowman's diversion. "Is it clear?" she asked, impatience seeping into her tone as she addressed the phone. "I said I'd let you know," Bowman replied curtly, the sharp edge in his voice catching Jennifer off guard. She flinched slightly at his tone but quickly regained her composure, attributing his brusqueness to the stress of the situation rather than any lingering personal issues between them. Several agonizing seconds passed, each ticking moment fraying their already strained nerves as they awaited his confirmation. "Move now," Bowman finally commanded. Jennifer didn't hesitate, unlatching the door with decisive movements and throwing it open. Cool night air rushed into the kitchen as she led the group out onto a small patio area at the back of the pier. They moved in unison, falling into line behind her like a well-rehearsed dance troupe, their movements propelled by fear and desperate hope. As Jennifer rounded the corner to the main walkway, she was confronted with a full view of the parking lot below. The sight caused her to gasp and freeze momentarily. At the far end of the lot, Bowman's police cruiser was surrounded by a writhing mass of zombies, their collective assault giving the impression of a single organism attacking the vehicle. Several creatures had clambered onto the hood, their fists pounding against the windshield with inhuman persistence. Inside the cruiser, Bowman reacted swiftly, throwing the vehicle into reverse and accelerating sharply. Tires squealed against asphalt as the car jolted backward, dislodging several zombies before speeding down the road, the siren's wail gradually fading as distance swallowed the sound. "Jesus Christ!" Elliot exclaimed suddenly. The group turned toward him in unison, just in time to witness a lone zombie charging at him from the direction of the bar. The creature moved with frightening speed, its dead eyes fixed on Elliot. The cook reacted on instinct, swinging his improvised weapon, the cast-iron frying pan, in a wide arc that connected solidly with the zombie's shoulder. The impact knocked the creature off balance, its momentum carrying it sideways toward Lucas, who deftly sidestepped the stumbling form. With surprising agility for a man who had spent the evening drinking, Lucas pivoted away, allowing the zombie to crash headlong into the railing that bordered the walkway. Parker and Caden responded without hesitation, rushing forward to grasp the disoriented creature by its legs. With a coordinated heave, they flipped it over the railing, sending it plummeting to the sand below. Jennifer gestured urgently for the group to follow, already moving toward the parking lot 20 yards away. Unfortunately, Elliot's outburst had not gone unnoticed. Heads turned among the zombie horde that had been pursuing Bowman's cruiser, their vacant gazes now redirecting toward the fleeing humans. "Run!" Jennifer shouted, abandoning any pretense of stealth. The group broke into a full sprint, their footfalls creating a thunderous rhythm on the wooden planks of the pier walkway. Parker and Tina pulled ahead, their younger legs carrying them to the parking lot first. Upon reaching the asphalt, they veered sharply to the right, making a beeline for Parker's car. As they approached the vehicle, Parker pressed the unlock button on his key fob. The car responded with a cheerful chirp and a flash of headlights. The pair reached the car well ahead of the pursuing zombies, quickly sliding into their seats and slamming the doors. Parker wasted no time, jamming the key into the ignition and bringing the engine to life with a reassuring roar. As the car's headlights illuminated the nightmarish scene, he checked the rearview mirror, concern for the others momentarily overriding his instinct for immediate escape. Elliot and Lucas sprinted down the center aisle of the parking lot, the cook's keys already in hand as they approached his vehicle. The pursuing zombies had spread out across the lot, their uneven gait nevertheless carrying them forward with alarming speed. Elliot reached the driver's side door first, sliding his key into the lock with trembling fingers. The door had barely swung open when a zombie slammed into it, the impact pinning Elliot between the door and the frame of the car. A cry of pain and surprise escaped him as the creature seized his head, pulling him towards its gaping maw. The cook struggled desperately, but his arms were trapped in the awkward position, rendering him defenseless. One zombie sank its teeth into his shoulder, while another circled around the side of the car and latched onto his arm, tearing through fabric and flesh with equal ease. Lucas, witnessing Elliot's grim fate unfolding, made a split-second decision. Rather than attempting a futile rescue, he pivoted away, ducking down behind adjacent cars as he retreated toward the relative safety of the bar. Survival instinct trumped loyalty in that decisive moment, a choice Lucas made without hesitation or apparent remorse. Meanwhile, Jennifer, Caden, and Dawn raced toward Jennifer's car, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The bar owner divided her attention between her destination and the approaching horde, aware that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. She pressed the unlock button on her key fob, the mechanical thunk of the locks disengaging cutting through the cacophony of moans and footfalls. As Jennifer approached the driver's side door, a lone zombie rounded the back of the vehicle, moving with predatory intent toward Dawn. Caden reacted instinctively, positioning himself between the creature and his girlfriend. He thrust his arms forward in a powerful shove, attempting to create distance between the zombie and Dawn. The maneuver partially succeeded, but as the zombie stumbled backward, it maintained its grip on Caden's forearm, the momentum of its retreat pulling the young man forward. "Caden!" Dawn screamed, her voice shattering with terror. Despite his desperate efforts to maintain his footing, Caden toppled forward, landing heavily atop the zombie. Jennifer immediately abandoned her attempt to enter the car, rushing to assist him, while Dawn remained frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and shock. On the ground, Caden struggled valiantly against his attacker, managing to fend off the creature's initial attempts to bite him. His arms trembled with the effort of keeping the gnashing teeth at bay, but the zombie's grip remained unyielding, its arms locked around him like iron bands. Jennifer reached the grappling pair, grabbing Caden's shoulders and attempting to pull him upright and away from danger. In her frantic effort, the car keys slipped from her grasp, landing on the asphalt with a small metallic clink. For a moment, it seemed Caden might break free. He had almost regained his footing when the zombie yanked violently on his wrist, destroying his precarious balance. The sudden movement caused Jennifer to lose her grip, sending her stumbling backward. Before she could recover, 2 more zombies converged on the scene, tackling Caden with savage force. What followed happened with horrific speed. Multiple sets of teeth tore into Caden's flesh, ripping away chunks from his arms, shoulders, and neck. His screams transformed into gurgling gasps as blood filled his throat, cutting off both sound and breath. Dawn's anguished cry pierced the night as Jennifer looked on helplessly, momentarily paralyzed by the brutal spectacle. Her gaze fell to the ground beside the feeding frenzy, where her car keys lay tantalizingly close, yet impossibly dangerous to retrieve. Before she could act on the impulse, Lucas appeared suddenly at her side, reaching out for her. "Come on, we have to get back to the kitchen," he shouted, grasping both women by their arms and physically pulling them toward the pier. Once they were moving in the same direction, Lucas released his grip, allowing himself to accelerate to his maximum speed. The 3 survivors sprinted back toward the walkway, their only viable option now a return to the temporary sanctuary they had just abandoned. A solitary zombie stood on the walkway, racing toward them with arms outstretched. Rather than changing course, Lucas maintained his trajectory, charging directly toward the threat. At the last possible moment, he came to an abrupt halt, bending at the waist and lunging forward in a move reminiscent of a football tackle. He caught the zombie at hip level, using its own momentum to lift and propel it over the railing. The creature disappeared over the edge with a surprise-sounding moan, landing on the sand several feet below. Without pausing to verify the effectiveness of his maneuver, Lucas resumed running, Jennifer and Dawn close behind. Jennifer cast a final glance over her shoulder in time to see Parker's car speeding out of the parking lot, taillights receding into the darkness as it carried Parker and Tina to an unknown destination. The sound of moans and shuffling footsteps from the direction of the bar spurred the trio to greater speed. Despite the burning in their lungs and the leaden weight of their exhausted limbs, they pushed forward, driven by the primal need to escape the death that pursued them. Seconds later, they reached the kitchen door, practically falling through the opening before slamming it shut behind them. Jennifer's trembling hands fumbled with the deadbolt, finally sliding it into place with a satisfying clunk. Almost immediately, multiple bodies collided with the door from the outside, the impact setting up a rhythmic pounding that matched their racing heartbeats. The combined weight of the zombies pressed against the damaged door, causing it to shift alarmingly at the top hinge, which had been in need of repair for weeks. The 3 survivors stood in place, chests heaving as they struggled to recover from their desperate sprint. Dawn collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor as hysterical sobs racked her body. Jennifer stared at the door with growing concern, watching as each impact caused it to bow slightly inward, the metal frame creaking in protest. Lucas, meanwhile, calmly walked over to the stainless steel counter, leaning against it with an exhale that seemed to deflate his entire body. He surveyed the kitchen that had once again become their prison, taking in the industrial appliances, the scattered utensils, and the 2 shell-shocked women who now constituted the entirety of his surviving companions. "Well," he observed with dry resignation, "that didn't work." Chapter 6. Dawn sat in the middle of the kitchen floor, her body folded in on itself like crumpled paper. Her gaze remained fixed on the back door, which continued to shudder rhythmically from the relentless pounding on its exterior. Tears streamed down her face in rivulets, her breath coming in ragged gasps as her mind replayed the horror she had witnessed only minutes before. One moment, Caden had been there, strong, protective, alive, and the next he was being torn apart before her eyes, his screams still echoing in her ears. The fluorescent lights of the kitchen cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the shock and disbelief etched into her features. Her shoulders heaved with each sob, her entire body trembling as she struggled to process the brutal reality of what had happened. "We have to go back out there for him," she said, her voice raw with emotion. Jennifer and Lucas exchanged a concerned glance across the kitchen, a silent communication passing between them. Neither wanted to be the one to verbalize the truth they both understood. Caden was beyond help, beyond saving. His fate had been sealed the moment those creatures had pulled him down. Dawn looked up, her red-rimmed eyes darting between them, searching for some indication that they shared her desperate urgency. Finding only pained hesitation, her voice rose in pitch and volume. "I said we have to go back out there for him." The sudden intensity of her demand cut through the ambient noise of moans and pounding from outside. When neither Jennifer nor Lucas moved toward the door, Dawn pushed herself to her feet with surprising energy, lurching toward the exit with single-minded determination. Jennifer reacted instinctively, closing the distance between them in 3 quick strides. She wrapped her arms around Dawn from behind, restraining the younger woman with gentle but unyielding firmness. Dawn struggled against the embrace, her body twisting and straining as she tried to break free, but Jennifer held steady, absorbing the physical manifestation of Dawn's grief. After a few moments of fruitless resistance, Dawn's struggles gave way to a fresh wave of hysterical crying. Her legs seemed to lose their strength, and she might have collapsed if not for Jennifer's supportive hold. "I'm sorry, Dawn, I really am," Jennifer said softly, her voice carrying genuine compassion. "But Caden's gone." The simple, devastating truth hung in the air, impossible to deny or soften. Dawn continued sobbing, her body convulsing with grief, as Jennifer maintained her protective embrace. The older woman's face reflected her own pain, not just for Dawn's loss, but for all of them, for the world that seemed to be unraveling around them with terrifying speed. The somber moment was interrupted by a subtle vibration from Jennifer's back pocket. She shifted her position to maintain one arm around Dawn while retrieving her phone with the other hand. "It's Parker," she announced, glancing at the screen. Dawn looked up, her tear-streaked face showing a hint of awareness for the first time since their return to the kitchen. She tapped Jennifer's arm lightly, a silent indication that she was stable enough to be released. Jennifer hesitated momentarily before loosening her grip, eyeing Dawn cautiously as she answered the phone and activated the speaker function so everyone could hear. "Parker, are you and Tina all right?" Jennifer asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone afraid to hope for good news. "Yeah, but not by much," Parker replied, his voice slightly distorted by static. "I didn't think my car was going to be able to push through them." "Is Tina with you?" Jennifer pressed, needing confirmation of the young server's safety. "She is, but we saw you running back to the bar. What happened?" Jennifer's expression tightened momentarily as she formulated her response, trying to convey the grim reality without dwelling on the horrific details. "Those things got to us before we could drive off." There was a brief pause before Parker asked the question they were all dreading. "Is everybody okay?" "No," Jennifer replied, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "It's just me, Lucas, and Dawn." The line went quiet, the silence more expressive than any words could have been. Parker was clearly processing the implications of Jennifer's statement, mentally accounting for those who hadn't made it back to safety. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the simple phrase carrying a depth of genuine regret. Jennifer acknowledged his condolence with a small nod before deliberately shifting the conversation away from their losses and toward more pressing matters. "Where are you at?" "We tried going down the main strip, but it's a shit show," Parker explained, the background noise suggesting they were still in motion, "but we managed to get across into the neighborhoods." "Are you heading towards the docks?" Jennifer asked, hope threading through her tone at the mention of potential escape. "The island isn't that big, so we're going to keep driving until we find water and hope there's a boat there." Jennifer nodded, finding comfort in the knowledge that at least some of her people had a viable plan for survival. "Good, you two need to get out of here." Tina's voice came through the speaker then, tinged with concern. "Do you want us to come back for you?" Jennifer glanced toward Lucas, their eyes meeting in another moment of wordless communication. They both understood their situation. The route back to the parking lot was likely impassable, and asking Parker and Tina to attempt a rescue would only endanger them as well. "No, take care of yourselves," Jennifer replied firmly, the decision made. "What are you going to do?" Parker asked, obvious worry in his voice. Jennifer straightened her posture slightly, summoning a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "You know me. I'll figure something out. Once we get to a boat, we'll try and stay close enough to shore that we have a phone signal," Parker offered. "I'm not sure what we'd be able to do, but call if you need help." "Will do, Parker. You and Tina be safe." "Thanks, Jennifer. You too." The call ended, leaving Jennifer staring at the darkened screen for several prolonged seconds, as if hoping it might offer some additional guidance or comfort. With a slight shake of her head, she navigated to her contacts and initiated a call to Officer Bowman. The phone rang twice before redirecting to voicemail, a clear indication that he had deliberately declined her call. Jennifer's shoulders slumped slightly as she released a defeated sigh. She waited for the automated message to finish, the beep prompting her to speak. "Yeah, Bowman, I probably would have declined my call too," she began, a hint of resigned understanding in her tone. "You didn't have to come back to help me out, but you did. I do appreciate it more than you know. I hope you stay safe out there, and maybe our paths will cross again one day." Her finger hovered over the screen momentarily before pressing the end call button. She stared at the device for a beat longer before slipping it back into her pocket, her expression a complex mixture of gratitude, regret, and acceptance. The kitchen fell into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the persistent sounds of danger. Zombies pounding against the back door, causing the weakened upper hinge to flex and squeak with each impact. On the opposite side of the room, several creatures continued reaching through the service window, their bloodied arms grasping blindly for anything within reach. Dawn wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand, smearing tears across her cheeks. She drew a deep, trembling breath before pushing herself fully upright, beginning to pace back and forth across the tiled floor. Her movements were jittery and uncoordinated, a physical manifestation of the emotional turmoil still raging within her, but there was a new determination in her stance. "Are you okay, Dawn?" Jennifer asked, knowing the answer, but needing to check in nonetheless. "No, I'm pretty far from okay," Dawn replied bluntly, her voice still thick with emotion, "but I can cry later. Right now, I need to calm down and get into the game." Jennifer nodded approvingly, relieved to see Dawn gathering herself despite the crushing weight of her grief. Her attention was diverted, however, by the distinctive sound of a beer bottle being opened. She turned to find Lucas casually drinking from a freshly opened bottle, his demeanor jarringly relaxed given their dire circumstances. Jennifer stared at him incredulously, the look prompting Lucas to respond with a casual shrug. "You can put it on my tab if you want," he offered, a hint of his usual charm breaking through the grimness of the moment. "Or, if you wanted one, I could grab it for you." Jennifer shook her head, a mixture of disbelief and reluctant amusement crossing her features. Even facing what could very well be the end of the world, Lucas remained steadfastly Lucas, a fact that was somehow both infuriating and oddly comforting. She found herself wondering, not for the first time, what exactly went on inside the head of her alcoholic regular. Whatever it was, it seemed to grant him a peculiar immunity to panic. "Well, the question of the moment is, what do we do now?" Jennifer said, dragging them back to the moment, "because I don't know how much longer that door is going to hold." As if to emphasize her point, the back door groaned under another coordinated assault, the metal frame visibly shifting with the impact. Lucas took another casual sip of his beer before responding. "Is your car not an option? I mean, assuming we can get to it." "No, I lost my keys in the parking lot," Jennifer explained, frustration evident in her tone, "and I don't think those people are going to give us a chance to look for them." Lucas contemplated this for a moment, his weathered face settling into thoughtful lines. "I guess we're swimming for it then." "Wait, that's not a bad idea," Dawn interjected, pausing her pacing as something sparked in her eyes, the first glimmer of hope since they'd returned to the kitchen. Lucas raised an eyebrow, surprised by her enthusiasm for what he'd intended as a half-serious suggestion. "Oh, it's a terrible idea. Where would we even swim to?" "Just up the beach a bit," Dawn replied, a new urgency in her voice as the beginnings of a plan began to crystallize in her mind. "Caden and I rented a house with some other friends," she continued, gesturing vaguely in what must have been the direction of the property. "It can't be more than half a mile away." Jennifer nodded slowly, the feasibility of the suggestion taking root. "It's not like we have to swim the entire way, just far enough away from the pier so those people don't know we're there." "Wait, if you have friends at the house..." Lucas began, his interest clearly piqued by the mention of potential help. Dawn shook her head, cutting him off before he could get too attached to the idea of immediate rescue. "They're not here yet. I've been texting them but haven't heard back. They weren't supposed to get in until the middle of the night anyway." "Have you tried calling them?" Jennifer asked. Dawn shook her head again, a rueful smile briefly crossing her lips. "They're not exactly the calling type. Pretty sure every call I've ever made to them went straight to voicemail." "You kids and your texting," Lucas remarked, shaking his head. The comment drew a small chuckle from both women, a surprising moment of levity that seemed almost surreal given the circumstances. Lucas took another calm swig of his beer, apparently satisfied with having lightened the mood, if only marginally. "Okay. That's the plan, then," Jennifer decided, her natural leadership reasserting itself. "We're going to get to the water and swim for it." As if sensing their renewed determination, the back door issued a horrific creaking sound, the metal frame beginning to separate from the wall as the damaged hinge continued to deteriorate under the relentless pressure from outside. "And we're going to have to move soon." Chapter 7. Jennifer, Lucas, and Dawn moved purposefully around the kitchen, their eyes scanning countertops and drawers for anything that might serve as a weapon. Their options were limited. Some chef's knives of varying sizes and a collection of heavy pans represented the extent of their defensive arsenal. Dawn selected a large knife with a gleaming blade, testing its weight and balance in her palm. Jennifer and Lucas each opted for heavy cast iron frying pans, the substantial heft offering some reassurance against the threats that awaited them outside. "This is a really bad idea, Jennifer," Lucas stated flatly, his weathered face etched with concern as he gripped the handle of his chosen pan. Jennifer turned to face him, her patience wearing thin after the cascade of disasters they'd already endured. Her response was curt, the stress of their situation evident in her clipped tone. "Your objection is noted, and you're more than welcome to try your luck here with that door." Lucas glanced back at the kitchen entrance, which continued to sway alarmingly under the relentless pressure of the zombies on the other side. The upper hinge creaked with each impact, metal grinding against metal as it gradually worked its way loose from the frame. It was only a matter of time before it failed completely. "Oh, I'm coming with you," he conceded, turning back to Jennifer with a grim expression, "but we're going to have to haul ass to the end of the pier before we jump." Dawn looked at him with confusion, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "We're not that far past low tide," Lucas explained, his tone suggesting this should be obvious. "So, unless we want to snap our legs on the seafloor, we need to be at the end to make sure the water is deep enough." Jennifer stared at him, momentarily distracted from their dire situation by this unexpected display of local knowledge. "How in the world do you know the tide times? I've lived here all my life. I'd have to check it 10 times a day and probably still mess it up." Lucas shrugged, the gesture casual despite the tension surrounding them. "I checked it before I came down here, because I like to walk back home with my feet in the surf, but staying close enough to shore to stay in the light. So I needed to know what time I had to leave at so I could do that." Jennifer studied him for a moment, a mixture of disbelief and newfound appreciation crossing her features. She shook her head slowly, a hint of a smile ghosting across her lips despite the circumstances. "You really are a high-functioning alcoholic, aren't you, Lucas?" Lucas responded with a broad smile before tilting his head back and draining the last of his beer, the action as natural to him as breathing. He lowered the empty bottle with a satisfied exhale. "Been that way since grade school, and don't have a reason to change now." Jennifer shook her head again, this time with a touch of resignation, before moving toward the small food service window. She cautiously approached the opening, trying to look past the grasping arms of the zombies outside to assess what else might be waiting for them. Despite her careful maneuvering and craning of her neck, the limited angle and the cluster of creatures blocking the view prevented her from gaining much useful information. "What do you see?" Dawn asked, hovering anxiously a few steps behind. Jennifer pulled back from the window with a frustrated sigh. "Not much past these 6. We have to assume there's more out there." "So how are we getting past the ones near the door?" Dawn pressed, her voice tight with apprehension. "This might be of use," Lucas interjected. The two women turned to find him standing beside a small metal pushcart used for transporting kitchen supplies. He had filled it with various utensils, plates, and other kitchen goods, creating a makeshift battering ram. While the cart itself had a plastic top, its metal frame appeared sturdy enough to serve as an improvised weapon. Jennifer eyed the contraption skeptically. "That's not going to do a whole lot." "It will if I can get up ahead of steam," Lucas countered confidently. "You pull the door open right as I get to it. If there's someone on the other side, they're going to get their teeth rattled." "It's better than nothing, I guess," Jennifer conceded, her tone reflecting limited enthusiasm but a recognition of their dwindling options. "It should also buy us a couple of seconds when those people come running after us," Lucas added, already positioning the cart into what he deemed the optimal starting position. Jennifer considered the plan briefly, her eyes darting between the increasingly compromised door and Lucas's improvised battering ram. She shook her head slightly, the gesture acknowledging that while this wasn't a great plan, their alternatives had essentially evaporated. The continued groaning of the back door's weakening structure emphasized the urgency of their situation. "Okay, we have to do this," she decided, her voice carrying the finality of someone who recognized when options had narrowed to a single path. "Lucas, get into position." Lucas nodded, positioning the cart so it aligned perfectly with the door. Jennifer and Dawn moved into place beside the entrance, their bodies tense as they prepared to pull it open, on Lucas's signal. "Remember, get to the end of the pier before jumping," Lucas reminded them, his voice betraying a seriousness that contrasted with his typically carefree demeanor. Both women nodded in acknowledgement, their faces set with determination despite the fear visible in their eyes. Lucas took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for what was to come, before shouting the command. "Open it now." Lucas lurched forward, pushing the cart with surprising strength. The wheels rattled against the tiled floor as it built momentum. Jennifer timed her movement perfectly, yanking the door open just as Lucas approached, revealing a zombie standing directly in the threshold. The cart slammed into the creature with tremendous force, driving it backward until it collided with the bar structure just a couple of yards away. Without hesitation, Lucas followed through with his attack, swinging his pan in a wide arc that connected solidly with the side of the zombie's head. The impact sent the creature tumbling to the ground, momentarily disoriented. "Run!" Lucas shouted, already moving toward the main portion of the pier. Lucas took point, leading the three survivors up the side of the bar. As they rounded the corner, he spotted two more zombies racing toward them from the opposite side of the establishment. Without breaking stride, he snatched a wooden chair from one of the outdoor tables, heaving it toward the approaching threats with remarkable strength. The chair sailed through the air, crashing into the lead zombie with enough force to knock it off its feet. The creature fell backward, colliding with its companion and sending both sprawling across the wooden deck. The maneuver bought them precious seconds as the zombies scrambled to regain their footing. Lucas maintained his pace, pushing ahead of the women as they navigated the pier's length. He felt a surge of relief when he scanned ahead and saw no immediate threats blocking their path to the pier's end. "Lucas," Jennifer's voice cut through the sound of their pounding footsteps, urgency and fear evident in her tone. He glanced back, his momentary relief evaporating at the sight that greeted him. Jennifer and Dawn were trailing several yards behind, clearly losing ground as they ran. More alarming was the dozen or more zombies in close pursuit, the lead creatures dangerously near to catching the women. Lucas turned forward again, desperately scanning the area ahead for anything that might help slow their pursuers. The pier was mostly clear, offering little in the way of obstacles he could utilize. Then, about 10 yards ahead, he spotted a plastic bucket likely left behind by a fisherman. He adjusted his course slightly, making a beeline for the potential weapon. Putting on a burst of speed, Lucas reached the bucket and scooped it up without breaking stride. In one fluid motion, he spun around and hurled it back toward the approaching horde. The bucket soared over Jennifer and Dawn's heads, landing with a hollow thud on the wooden planks of the pier. The improvised obstacle worked partially. One zombie ran directly into it, tripping and sprawling across the deck. Several others stumbled over the fallen creature, creating a brief pileup that disrupted the pursuit. However, 4 zombies managed to avoid the obstruction entirely, continuing their relentless chase and steadily gaining on Jennifer. Jennifer could feel her strength flagging as she pushed her body to its limits. The sound of pursuing footsteps grew louder behind her, driving her forward even as her muscles screamed in protest. Then she felt it, the unmistakable brush of fingertips against the back of her shirt. With horrifying clarity, she realized she wouldn't make it to the end of the pier. A quick glance over the side confirmed her worst fears. At this point along the pier, the water below was dangerously shallow. Jumping would almost certainly result in broken legs at best, and more likely a fatal impact on the ocean floor. Time seemed to slow as Jennifer processed her limited options in the fraction of a second available to her. With a primal yell that channeled all her fear and determination, she spun around to face her pursuers, swinging the heavy pan with every ounce of strength she possessed. The makeshift weapon connected solidly with the closest zombie, the impact so fierce that it sent the creature careening sideways into the railing, its head cracking audibly against the wooden barrier. Fueled by adrenaline and survival instinct, Jennifer sidestepped the next attacker's lunging grasp, causing it to stumble past her. Before it could recover, she raised her pan high and brought it down with devastating force on another approaching zombie. The metal connected with the top of the ghoul's skull with a sickening crack, dropping it instantly to the deck. Jennifer attempted to swing at the next creature, but it closed the distance too quickly. The zombie slammed into her with the full momentum of its charge, the violent impact lifting Jennifer off her feet and sending her crashing backward onto the wooden planks. Her head struck the hard surface with a dull thud, and consciousness fled immediately, the world going dark in an instant. She never felt the teeth that tore into her flesh moments later. Dawn froze several yards ahead, a scream building in her throat as she watched the zombies descend upon Jennifer like a pack of feral animals. Before the sound could escape her lips, Lucas's hand clamped firmly over her mouth, stifling her cry. "We have to move, now," he hissed urgently in her ear, his grip unyielding despite her instinctive struggle. Lucas dragged Dawn away from the grisly scene, forcing her to continue toward the end of the pier. He understood that Jennifer's sacrifice had bought them precious time they couldn't afford to waste. Each second the zombies spent feeding on Jennifer was a second they weren't pursuing them. They reached the edge of the pier breathing heavily, adrenaline and exertion taking their toll. Lucas scrambled up onto the railing, balancing precariously before reaching down to help Dawn join him. Together they perched on the narrow wooden beam, staring down at the dark waters below. The drop was substantial, the black surface of the ocean seeming impossibly far away in the dim light. Lucas turned to Dawn, his expression grave as he delivered his final instructions. "Go in feet first, hold your breath, because that cold is going to knock it right out of you. When you get up to the surface, start swimming your butt off." Dawn nodded mechanically, her eyes darting back toward the zombie horde still clustered around Jennifer's fallen form. The horrific sight seemed to snap her back to the present moment, her face hardening with renewed determination. She gave Lucas a curt nod indicating her readiness, and together they stepped off the edge of the railing, taking their leap of faith into the void below. Chapter 8. The two fell for what felt like an eternity before splashing down. The frigid water temperature ripped the breath from Dawn's lungs, causing her to panic as she continued to sink beneath the water. The salt stung her eyes when she instinctively opened them, revealing nothing but murky darkness all around. Her waterlogged clothes pulled her downward, the additional weight working against her as she struggled to orient herself. It took her a moment to begin swimming upwards, fighting against her sodden attire, but eventually managing to break the surface. She gasped desperately, filling her lungs with the cool night air, her body already trembling from the shocking cold. She screamed out in terror as a set of hands grabbed onto her from behind, causing her to flail around wildly, imagining the creatures from the pier had somehow followed them into the water. It's Lucas, the familiar voice shouted, trying to break through her panic. Dawn composed herself after hearing his voice, her frantic movement subsiding as recognition set in. She turned to find Lucas treading water beside her, his hair plastered to his forehead, face glistening with salt water in the dim moonlight. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just cold," she replied through chattering teeth, her body already shivering uncontrollably in the autumn waters. "A little swimming will help warm you up. Come on." Lucas nodded to his left, indicating their direction. and began moving with strong, practiced strokes. Don followed his lead, and both of them pumped their arms and legs hard, struggling against the constant movement of the ocean. Each wave lifted and dropped them, making their progress feel laborious and slow. Dawn hadn't spent much time in the ocean, making her movements less efficient than her companions. She stayed behind Lucas, mirroring his path and rhythm, grateful for his guidance in the unfamiliar environment. His strokes were surprisingly powerful for a man who'd spent the evening drinking, cutting through the water with unexpected efficiency. They swam for what felt like years, gradually putting distance between themselves and the pier. After covering about 100 yards, Lucas looked back over his shoulder, scanning the water behind them for any sign of pursuit. He appeared relieved when he saw nothing following them, at least not yet. "I think we're good if you want to get out of the water," he called back to her, slowing his pace slightly. "Are you sure we're far enough away?" Dawn questioned, anxiety evident in her voice as she glanced back toward the distant pier. "I think we are, but if you want to keep swimming, we can." She shook her head in a definitive no, the motion exaggerated to ensure he could see it clearly in the darkness. "If I stay in this water much longer, I'm going to die of hypothermia." Lucas let out a chuckle before motioning for her to follow. They continued swimming along the shoreline but angled toward the beach. After another 20 yards, the water grew shallow enough for them to stand, and they staggered onto shore, their soaked clothes clinging heavily to their exhausted bodies. Both of them dropped to their knees in the surf, giving their muscles a moment to relax. The gentle waves lapped against their legs as they caught their breath, the cool night breeze intensifying the chill of their wet clothing. "Are you sure you'll be able to pick out the house?" Lucas asked between deep breaths, scanning the darkened shoreline. Dawn nodded, pointing down the beach where a row of vacation homes stood silhouetted against the night sky. Most of the houses were dark, with only a few showing lights on the first floor. Only one property had illumination visible from its top level, a beacon in the darkness. "It's the one with the third-floor light on. I left it on when I left, figuring it would be easier to spot when we were walking back drunk off our asses." "Well, I'm currently drunk off my ass, and I can see it just fine," Lucas replied, with a hint of his usual humor. Dawn chuckled briefly at his comment, but the small moment of levity was cut short as Lucas suddenly tensed beside her, his attention caught by something moving in the direction of the pier. Dawn followed his gaze, fear instantly returning as she tried to discern what he was seeing in the darkness. Lucas squinted, focusing on a figure moving slowly along the beach toward them. Unlike the zombies they'd encountered, this shape didn't move with unnatural speed or aggression. Instead, it progressed laboriously, dragging one leg behind rather than running. After several moments of observation, recognition dawned on Lucas's face. "What in the hell is he doing out here?" He stood up, raising an arm in a tentative wave. The distant figure returned the gesture, confirming it was human and aware. As the person drew slightly closer, Dawn could make out the familiar form of Oscar, the young busboy from the Surfside bar. They were still 100 yards apart when Oscar called out, his voice carrying across the empty beach. "Please help me. I can't walk." Lucas muttered to himself as he motioned urgently for Oscar to lower his voice. "Christ, kid, I see you. Now shut up." Despite Lucas's frantic hand gestures, Oscar continued calling out for help, either not understanding or too panicked to heed the warning. Lucas turned to Dawn, his expression growing serious. "Stay here, but be ready to run." Dawn nodded, continuing to rub her arms and legs, trying to restore circulation and warmth to her extremities. She watched anxiously as Lucas began jogging toward Oscar, making emphatic, silencing gestures. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. Back at the pier, Dawn spotted movement as a handful of zombies tumbled over the railing to the sand below, immediately orienting toward the sound of Oscar's voice. "Damn it," Lucas muttered, stopping mid-stride as he assessed the rapidly deteriorating situation. He briefly seemed to consider continuing toward Oscar, but quickly realized the futility of a rescue attempt. The zombies were closing in quickly, while the injured busboy remained unaware of the threat behind him. Lucas pointed urgently, alerting Oscar to the danger at his back. Oscar turned, his expression transforming to terror as he spotted the approaching zombies. He attempted to flee, but his injured leg immediately buckled under the strain, sending him sprawling onto the sand. His cries intensified as he struggled futilely to regain his footing. Lucas didn't hesitate further. He spun around and sprinted back toward Dawn, shouting as he approached, "We have to go!" Dawn scrambled to her feet, ignoring her exhaustion as adrenaline surged through her body once more. Together, they ran down the beach toward the house with the third-floor light, the sounds of pursuit spurring them to greater speed despite their wet clothes and tired muscles. Much to Lucas's surprise, they reached the beach house with a comfortable lead on their pursuers. A tall wooden fence surrounded the beachside yard. Dawn fumbled with her keys, struggling to locate and insert the right one into the gate's lock with trembling fingers. Seeing the zombies gaining ground rapidly, Lucas made a split-second decision. He grabbed Dawn by the waist, lifting her up and over the fence in a single, powerful movement. Before she could react, he took a step back, then charged forward and vaulted over the barrier himself. He landed hard on the ground, knocking the air from his lungs as several zombies reached the fence, which stood nearly at eye level. The creatures rattled the wooden slats violently, attempting to force their way through to their escaped prey. Dawn and Lucas watched tensely for several seconds, relieved when the zombies made no attempt to climb over, as Lucas had done. They seemed incapable of the reasoning required for such a maneuver, continuing instead to shake the fence futilely. "Come on, let's get inside," Dawn urged, helping Lucas to his feet. They hurried up the path to the house, their footsteps leaving wet impressions on the wooden steps. Dawn slipped the key into the lock, opening the door. Both of them entered quickly, immediately securing the deadbolt and beginning to pull every shade and curtain closed. They moved methodically through the house, checking and securing every entrance, drawing blinds over every window. The goal was clear: make the property appear vacant and unwelcoming to any wandering infected. "Are you good?" Lucas asked, studying Dawn with genuine concern. "Yeah, I think so," she replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Dawn pulled out her cell phone, grimacing as water dripped from the device. The screen remained dark, clearly damaged by their swim. She tossed it on the counter with a frustrated sigh. "Maybe it'll start up once it dries out." "There's a landline if you need to call," Lucas began, then trailed off, remembering what she had said about her friends not answering their calls. "Yeah, kids these days," he continued, with a slight shake of his head. "I bet you don't even have their numbers memorized, do you?" Dawn looked at him with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "My God, Lucas, exactly how old are you?" Lucas let out a chuckle, grinning from ear to ear. "Probably old enough to be your dad." All Dawn could do was let out a horrified laugh at the thought, the sound catching in her throat. "I'll go find us some towels and see if I can't find you something dry," she offered, already moving toward the stairs. Lucas nodded gratefully as Dawn vanished upstairs. Alone for the first time since their nightmare began, she took a moment to herself, quickly drying off and changing into fresh clothes. While searching for something that might fit Lucas, she paused at Caden's suitcase, emotions washing over her as she unzipped it. She broke down for a moment, tears flowing freely as she pulled out clothes for Lucas from her boyfriend's luggage. The simple domestic act of handling Caden's neatly folded shirts, clothes he would never wear again, made his loss suddenly, painfully tangible. "Get it together, Dawn," she whispered to herself, wiping away tears. She came back downstairs, walking into the kitchen and letting out a surprised gasp as she saw Lucas standing at the counter, wearing nothing but a cooking apron. The garment covered his front adequately, but left his backside entirely exposed. "Oh, I did not need to see that," she exclaimed, quickly averting her eyes. Lucas looked back, suddenly realizing he was delivering a full moon to Dawn. He quickly turned around with a sheepish expression. "Sorry about that. I thought you were going to be another minute." Dawn held up the clothes, putting them down on the counter without making eye contact. "I'll give you a minute. In the meantime, I'll see if I can't find us some news." Lucas smiled and nodded, waiting for her to leave before getting dressed. A few moments later, he walked into the living room, carrying 2 mixed drinks, handing one over to Dawn, who had settled on the couch and found the remote. "What is this?" she asked, accepting the glass cautiously. "Something that will warm you up and calm your nerves." Dawn knew that the drink wouldn't actually warm her up, but she wasn't in any condition to refuse something to calm her nerves. She raised a quick toast, clinking glasses with Lucas, more of a reflex than a celebration of anything, before taking a sip. The two of them sat side by side on the couch as Dawn flipped through channels, finding nothing but pre-programmed shows. Sitcoms, talk shows, and the movie of the week played on, as if the world hadn't fundamentally changed just a few miles away. "There's no news anywhere," she observed, concern evident in her voice as she continued scrolling through channels. "That can mean one of two things," Lucas said thoughtfully. "Either this isn't as bad as we think it is, or," Dawn prompted when he paused, "or it's a lot worse than we can possibly imagine." Dawn let that sentence settle over her before downing half her drink in a single sip, not wanting to contemplate the implications of his assessment. The two of them continued sitting in silence as she flipped channels, eventually stopping on a sitcom rerun. She tossed the remote to the couch, giving up on finding any useful information about the crisis. Lucas glanced over, noticing a bit of comfort in her eyes, as if this was a favorite show of hers. Rather than continue looking for news, he let it play, stretching his legs out before reaching over and grabbing a blanket off a neighboring chair, draping it over Dawn's shoulders. "Thank you, Lucas, for everything tonight," she said softly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "It's been my pleasure, Dawn," he replied with surprising gentleness. "Now, let me know when you need a refill." Dawn smiled, giving him a subtle nod before getting as comfortable as she could underneath the blanket. The familiar sounds of the sitcom's laugh track created an almost surreal contrast to the horrors they'd witnessed. She felt confident that they had survived the night, but with everything that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to think about what the world would look like once the sun came up in the morning. The end.